This will be our second chapter of ancient Indian history. That I took this book about the R.S. Sharma about in ancient history, ancient past. Okay, so today we will be discussing about the modern historians or historians' views about Indian ancient Indian history. Okay, so without delay, let's start the first conversation. Colonialist views and their contribution. I hope you need a pen and paper to write about running notes to revise and write and revise in the next phase, that we will be able to revise through our running notes, because it is impossible in a short period of time to cover whole of the syllabus, whole of the subjects. Okay, so you have to write these short text in your running notes in your textbook. Okay, so let's start. So first we will be understand about the colonialist views. Okay, so you have to write down colonialist views. Okay, who are the colonists? The British. Okay, British scholars. They wrote about Indian history because the Indian history was not known because of the uh, various writers had written the Indian history, but they generally they generally replaced they or we British generally wrote about the their history through the conversation of the Sanskrit text from Sanskrit to English. Okay, so first view is although colonist views and their contribution. So although educated Indians retained their traditional history in the form of handwritten epics, Puranas, and biographical works, modern research in the history of ancient India began only in the second half of the 18th century to serve the needs of the British colonial administration. Okay, so simply it is saying that British start their writing text mid 18th century, or when they defeated and established their empire after 1765. So various British scholars were exposed themselves that we will write about Indian history. Okay, now we will know about the Indian past, when they were uh, educated or not, when they were civilized or barbaric. Okay, so British more number of British scholars declare the ancient Indian people were barbaric type. Okay, barbarism means the ancient living condition, like they were hunter gatherers or foragers, any other things. Okay, so when Bengal and Bihar fell under the rule of the East India Company in 1765, they found it difficult to administer the Hindu law of inheritance. Okay, so Hindu law of inheritance, they were uh, administered this. Therefore, in 1776, the Manu Smriti, the law book of Manu, which was considered authoritative, was translated into English as a code of the Gentoo laws. Okay, so we generally know about the Manu Smriti. Manu Smriti, you often uh, listen about in the various parts of the country that people gather and support the Manu Smriti to Hindu Rashtra or any other Hindu sentiments that they also declared in various other religious groups as bigot against the uh, Hindu law books. Okay, so which was considered authoritative was translated into English as a code of Gentoo laws. Pandits were associated with British judges to administer Hindu civil law and Maulvis to administer that of Muslims. Okay, so Hindu civil law were handled or were administered by Hindu Pandits and Maulvi of their Muslim law books like Muslim laws like Shariat or one their book is the Quran. Okay, the initial efforts to understand about ancient laws and customs. Okay, this is the this marker is very good to highlight these points. Okay, so the initial efforts to understand ancient laws and customs, which continued largely until the 18th century, culminated in the establishment in Calcutta in 1784 of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. You have to know about the Asiatic Society of Bengal that was established by the Sir William Jones in 1746 to 94. He was the first to suggest that Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek languages are the same languages belong to the same family. Okay, he translated the play known as Abhijana Sakuntalam written by our most scholar, most remarkable scholar named as Kalidas. English in 17 into English in 1789. It was converted. Abhijana Sakuntalam was translated by William Jones in 1789. The Bhagavad Gita, the most popular Hindu religious text, was translated into English by Wilkins in 1785. So you have to know about this book that English translated in British translated these books from Sanskrit to English. The Bombay Asiatic Society was set up in 1804 and the Asiatic Society of Great Britain was set up in London in 1823. So Asiatic Society of Bengal was first created in India, that is in 1784 by Sir William Jones, and after that Bombay Asiatic Society was set up in 1804, and after that London Society of Great Britain, Asiatic Society of Great Britain was set up in 1823 in London. William Jones emphasized that originally the European languages were very similar to Sanskrit and the Iranian languages. Various scholars, various historian so various historians told that most number of European languages and Iranian languages used the similar text as in the as written in the as found in Sanskrit language. This enthused European countries such as Germany, France, and Russia to foster Indological studies. So they also prefer to read Indological text, and behalf of the because of this, the most British scholars translated the Hindu or any Indian text into the English to understand properly. During the first half of the 19th century, chairs in Sanskrit were established in the UK and several other European countries. The greatest impetus to Indological studies was given by the German scholar F. Max Muller. So Max Muller was an important scholar of uh, Germany. Okay, because uh, he also wrote Indian history, or we can say the history of Aryans, or he gave a theory, that is Aryan invasion theory, by Max Muller, that was very popular among the various scholars of the world. That it was right or wrong here and there, that is not not important, as a scholar, as a archaeological survey of India discovered much more evidences that Max Muller theory was not adequate to tell about how Aryans invaded or not. But the theory of Max Muller, Aryan invasion theory, was replaced by Aryan migration theory, not Aryan invasion theory. Okay, so you have to understand, we have to know about this. So three, you have to write in your running note that colonialist with various society of Bengal, society of Asiatic Society of Bengal, Asiatic Society of Bengal. Bengal in 1784 by William Jones, William Jones, and Bombay Asiatic Society, Bombay Asiatic Society in 1804 by Wilkins, and the Asiatic Society of London, Asiatic Society of London, London by set up in 1823. Okay, so you need to learn about these uh, Asiatic societies. Okay, who was largely, and the Aryan invasion theory was given by Max Muller, who was largely based in England. The revolt of 1857 caused Britain to realize that it badly needed a deeper knowledge of the manners and social systems of an alien people over whom it ruled. So, Max Muller wrote about the Indian past, that Indians were barbaric people and they were uncivilized. So, various types of various types of inferior knowledge given by Max Muller about Indians. Similarly, the Christian missionaries sought to uncover the vulnerabilities in the Hindu religion to win converts and strengthen the British Empire. So they talk about themselves as liberator of Indians. Okay, to meet these needs, ancient scriptures were translated on a massive scale under the editorship of Max Muller. Although 50 volumes, some in several parts, were published under the East, Sacred Books of the East series. Although a few Chinese and Iranian texts were included, ancient Indian texts were predominant. Okay, so compared to Chinese and Iranian text, they declare Indian text as predominant over the Iranian and Chinese text. In introductions to these volumes and the books based on them, Max Muller and other Western scholars made certain generalizations about the nature of ancient Indian history and society. They stated that the ancient Indians lacked a sense of history, especially of the element of time and chronology. They added that Indians were accustomed to despotic rule and also natives were so engrossed in the problems of spiritualism or of the next world that they fell to no concern about the problems of this world. The Western scholars state that Indians had experienced neither a sense of nationhood nor any form of self-government. So it is simply means that various Western scholars, including Max Muller, claimed that Indians rule as despotism. Despotic rules means they Indians often fight with each other to rule their country, but they generally do not have any concept of nationhood or any form of any form of governance to govern thus as a self government. Okay, so this is simply various English scholars told about Indian people. Many of these generalizations were made in the early history of India by Vincent Arthur Smith, or simply we can say A.V. Smith, who wrote in 1904 Early History of India, written by A.V. Smith, who wrote in 1904 the first systematic history of ancient India. His book, which was based on an in-depth study of the available sources, gave primacy to political history. Okay, so he wrote about political history of India. It served as a textbook for nearly 50 years and is still used by scholars. Smith's approach to history was pro-imperialist. Okay, so his text also based on uh, preference of imperialism or pro-imperialist power. As a loyal member of the Indian civil service, he emphasized the role of foreigners in ancient India. Alexander's invasion accounted for almost one third of his book. India was presented as a land of despotism which had not experienced political unity until the establishment of British rule. So they consider themselves as liberator, that Indians were not be able to rule rule their country because they don't generally have any concept of self rule or governance to build a nation, or they also did not know about to create a nationhood territory, or they often uh, they mostly follow despotic rule in whole of Indian subcontinent. Okay, in some, British interpretations of Indian history served denigrate the Indian character and achievements and justify colonial rule. That colonial rule was the liberation of the evil practices or evil uh, practices of any form of social accustomed rule. A few of these observations appear to have some validity. Thus, in comparison to the Chinese, Indians did not know any strong sense of chronology, although in the earlier stage, important events were dated with reference to the death of Gautama Buddha. Okay, so they also told us that does not Indian textbooks do not adequate to tell about the chronology of history. That sometimes they also grammatically uh, incorrect written in various texts, that various rulers also do not talk about any measure to write the history in a chronological manner that some textbook write about Gautam Buddha as a previous or later. They do not generally tell about the chronology of Gautam Buddha's history. However, generalizations made by colonialist historians were by and large either false or grossly exaggerated, but served as good propaganda material for the perpetuation of the despotic British rule. Their emphasis on the Indian tradition of one man rule could justify the system which vested all powers in the hands of the viceroy. Similarly, if Indians were obsessed with the problems of the next world, the British colonial masters had no option but to look after their life in this world. So, Indian scholars also oppose the British scholars' view that when if Indian do such things that no that one life could be achieved in the past or present or in future, or simply we can say Indian scholars also told about the british British text that if British believe that if Indian believe sorry not believe, British if Indian believes that after life is also a life, then British master also consider himself as this is he would be rule this he would be rule this life as well as that life after life. So opposed they generally oppose the British text as well. Without any experience of self rule in the past, how could the natives manage their affairs in the present? At the heart of all such generalizations lay the need to demonstrate that Indians were incapable of governing themselves. Nationalist approach. Second is first we discussed colonialist view, and the next nationalist view. Nationalist view. You should write down, okay? Nationalist approach. So, nationalist approach and its contribution, all this naturally came as a great challenge to Indian scholars, particularly to those who had received Western education. They were upset by the colonialist distortions of their past history and at the same time distressed by the contrast between the decaying feudal society of India and the progressive capitalist society of Britain. A band of scholars took upon themselves not only the mission to reform Indian society but also to reconstruct ancient Indian history in such a way as to make a case for social reforms and, more importantly, for self government. In doing so, most historians were guided by the nationalist ideas of Hindu revivalism, but there was no dearth of scholars who adopted a rationalist and objective approach. To the second category belongs Rajendra Lal Mitra, who published some Vedic text and wrote a book entitled Indo-Aryans. A great lover of ancient heritage, he took a rational view of ancient society and produced a forceful tract to show that in the ancient times people ate beef. Others sought to prove that in spite of its peculiarities, the caste system was not basically different from the class system based on division of labor found in Europe's pre-industrial and ancient societies. So, Rajendra Lal Mitra hits about the past European society that British or European people did not be able to uh, understand how they lived life in the past. And he also wrote about the social system that European society generally ate beef as well as practice, and more practice are they generally they also not know about the self government. They also not about this, they are not be able to establish a self government rule. And also the nationalist ideas of Hindu revivalism would be guided by Indian itself. Okay, and they he also wrote a book entitled Indo Aryans to tell about the Vedic text. That Indo Aryans book, he talks about the Aryan migration theory, that the Aryan did not migrate, did not invade, or Aryans not invaded in Indian subcontinent. They generally came in India from Central Asia to search pasture land for their cattle, because they were cattle herder. In Maharashtra, Ram Krishna Gopal Bhandarkar, you heard about this? Ram Krishna Gopal Bhandarkar or R.J. Bhandarkar, he was great historian to write about the Indian past. And Vishwanath Kasinath Rajwade emerged as two great dedicated scholars who pieced together varied sources to reconstruct the social and political history of India. R.G. Bhandarkar reconstructed the political history of the Satavahanas of Deccan and the history of Vaishnavism and other sects. A great social reformer, through his researches, he advocated widow remarriage and castigated the evils of the caste system and child marriage. With his unadulterated passion for research, V.K. Rajwade journeyed from village to village in Maharashtra in search of Sanskrit manuscripts and sources of Maratha history. The sources were eventually published in 22 volumes. He did not write much, but the history of the institution of marriage that he wrote in Marathi in 1926 will continue to be a classic because of its solid base in Vedic and other texts, and also because of the author's insight into the stages in the evolution of marriage in India. Okay, so these two scholars contributed much for ancient Indian past, that we generally know about the Indian past history through these texts. Pandurang Vaman Kane, or Kane simply we can say, a great Sanskritist wedded to social reform, continued the earlier tradition of scholarship. His monumental work entitled The History of the Dharma Shastra, published in 5 volumes in the 20th century, is an encyclopedia of ancient social laws and customs that enables us to study the social processes in ancient India. He wrote about the practices, rites, and rituals which Indians have adopted. The Indian scholars diligently studied the polity and political history to demonstrate that India did have a political history and that the Indians possessed expertise in administration. They also opposed the in British text. The British believed that Indians did not know about self rule and any nationhood authority. But Indian nationalist view opposed this idea that ancient Indian past people generally uh, frequently know, or they know about the self rule, how to manage, how to govern as self rule, and they also created their nation, or they also created their territory as nation, because they have general rule to follow the rule of law. Here, due credit should be given to Devdutt Ramakrishna Bhandarkar, or D.R. Bhandarkar, simply we can say, an epigraphist who published books on Ashok and on ancient Indian political institutions. More valuable work was done by Hemchandra Ray Chaudhary. Hemchandra Ray Chaudhary, who reconstructed the history of ancient India from the time of the Bharata Mahabharat war, that is 10th century BC to the end of the Gupta Empire. So you have to write about the some scholars related to nationalist view, which are very important to write for means perspective. So nationalist view, R.G. Bhandarkar first. R.G. Bhandarkar. R.G. Bhandarkar. Then second would be Convery. What it means to say? Yes, V.K. Rajwade. V.K. Rajwade. V.K. Rajwade. Third was Hemchandra. Hemchandra. He is very important. Okay, and you can also text about this. Hemchandra Ray Chaudhary. Hemchandra Ray Chaudhary about the Bharat War. Bharat War or Mahabharat War. Mahabharata. Okay, that is 10th century BC to the end of the Gupta Empire. As a teacher of European history, he adopted some of the methods and comparative insights in writing this book, although he did not discuss the problem of periodization. Okay, periodization does not discuss. Periodization of Indian past was not discussed by him. His history of ancient India stopped with the 6th century AD, though he recognized the contribution of A.V. Smith to the reconstruction of early Indian history. Yet Ray Chaudhary criticized the British scholar at many points. His writings are marked by impeccable scholarship but show a streak of militant Brahmanism when he criticizes Ashoka's policy of peace. A stronger element of Hindu revivalism appears in the writings of R.C. Majumdar. He was also a great historian or great anthropologist, R.C. Majumdar, who was a prolific writer and the general editor of multi-volume publication History and Culture of the Indian People. Most writers on early Indian history did not give adequate attention to South India. They generally talked about North Indian history. Even K.A. Neelkant Sastri, he is also important, so you have to write down K.A. Neelkant Sastri. K. Neelkant Sastri, the great historian from South India. He was from South India. Followed the same approach in his A History of Ancient India. But this was more than rectified in his A History of South India. Okay, so you have to write down his text. Write a history of South India. He wrote about this book, A History of South India. Okay. His style is terse, but his writing lucid. In the presentation of facts, he is as dependable as Rai Chaudhary, because he did not know he did not find about much more history. He also took a reference when he wrote about a history of South India. He also took a reference from the Rai Chaudhary's book. However, his general observations on the nature of polity and society in South India are questioned by several scholars. Neelkant Sastri emphasized the cultural supremacy of Brahmanas and also highlighted the harmony that prevailed in early Indian society, that we generally uh, read about the Varna system of four factor of Varna system, four Varnas of Varna system, that is Brahman, Kshatri, Vaishya and Shudra. And Brahmanas were above all for Varna system. So Neelkant Sastri generally talk about the dominance in ancient past. In ancient Indian history, the Brahmanas were most dominant Varna among all four Varna system. Under his leadership, several research monographs were produced on the dynastic history of South India. Until 1960, political history attracted the largest number of Indian scholars who also glorified the histories of their respective regions on dynamic lines. Those who wrote history at a pan-India level were inspired by ideas of nationalism. So you often know about when any scholar, any writer, or any historian wrote his text in a historical past, then he also considered as pan-Indian scholar. He is also considered as pan-Indian scholar when he generally talk about the whole of India, in contrast to the book of A.V. Smith, who devoted almost a third of the total space of Alexander's invasion. Indian scholars, okay, A.V. Smith was A.V. Smith. A.V. Smith wrote about Alexander's invasion. Alexander's invasion. Okay, Alexander's invasion. Indian scholars gave his subject much less importance. Okay, so A.V. Smith considered much more Alexander's past or Alexander's invasion, and he was also opposed by Indian scholars, and he talked about less importance of this Alexander's invasion, that was not much important for our Indian past to know more about this. On the other hand, they stressed the importance of the dialogue of Porus with Alexander and Chandragupta Maurya's liberation of northwestern India from Seleucus. Some scholars such as K.P. Jaiswal and A.S. Altekar overplayed the role of the indigenous ruling dynasties in liberating India from the rule of the Sakas and Kushanas, little realizing that Central Asians and others became an intrinsic part of India's life and did not exploit Indian resources for their original homeland. So Sakas and Kushan, as talked by as is being talked about Sakas and Kushan as by A.S. Altekar and K.P. Jaiswal. He also you should write the A.S. Altekar. A.S. Altekar. Okay. A.S. Altekar talked about the invasion of Saka and Kushanas, but they also consider themselves as Indians, and they know about they talked about the origination of their origination of birth, their original birthplace in India. Okay, they don't consider themselves as they are Central Asian tribes. They consider themselves as Indians. Okay, however, the greatest merit of KP Jaiswal lay in exploding the myth of Indian despotism. As early as 1910-12, he wrote several articles to show that republics existed in ancient times and enjoyed a measure of self-government. Okay, his findings finally appeared in Hindu Polity 1924, although Jaiswal is charged with projecting modern nationalist ideas into ancient institutions, and the nature of the republican government presented by him is attacked by many writers, including U.N. Ghoshal. His basic thesis regarding the practice of the republican experiment is widely accepted, and his pioneer work, Hindu Polity, now in its sixth edition, is considered a classic because he generally talked about the British scholars talked about Indians did not have any type of the any concept of nationalism or any type of the governance system as self governance, and he also he also sorry they also consider Indians as barbaric people, and they should be uncivilized because they don't know about the nation to rule properly. But Altaker and other scholars, or we can say even Kushal, talked about the Republican army of ancient Indian past, and also we know about the Republican states like Mahajanpadas. Many Mahajanpadas like Magad Empire also considered as a Republican state. Okay, and then move towards non-political history. We now consider the non-political history means the social, economic, technological, and any other art and culture section of ancient Indian history. British historian A.L. Basham, or we can say A.L. Basham, a Sanskritist by training, questioned the wisdom of looking at ancient India from the modern point of view. His earlier writings show his deep interest in the materialist philosophy of some heterodox sects. Later, he believed that the past should be read out of curiosity and pleasure. His book, The Wonder That Was India. Okay, so you should write about this. Okay, other political scholar. First, A.L. Basham. A.L. Basham. Book name is The Wonder That Was India. That was India 1951. Okay, is a sympathetic survey of the various phases of ancient Indian culture and civilization, free from the prejudices that plague the writings of A.V. Smith and many other British writers. He opposed the prejudice about the Indian people in the past, written by A.B. Smith and other British writers. But A.L. Basham generally talk about the Indian people were civilized, and they also consider themselves as the not despotic people, but they rule, or various kings rule their empire as the nation builder. Basham's book marks a great shift from political to non-political history. The same shift is evident in D.D. Kushambi. You have to write this also. So D.D. Kushambi. D.D. Kushambi book name is An Introduction to the Study of Indian History. An introduction to the study of Indian history, 1957. Later popularized in the Civilization of Ancient India in Historical Outlook, 1965. Kosambi blazed a new trail in Indian history. His treatment follows a materialist interpretation of history, which is derived from the writings of Karl Marx. He presents the history of ancient Indian society, economy, and culture. So, society, economy, and culture as an integral part of the development of the forces and relations of population. He was the first survey volume to show the stages of social and economic development in terms of tribal and class processes. He was criticized by many scholars, including Basam, but his books continues to be widely read because he also considered Indians as civilized and more towards the Indians positive viewpoint. He talked about Indians positive viewpoint. Over the past 40 years, there has been a sea change in the methods and orientation of those who work on ancient India. They lay greater stress on social, economic, and cultural processes and try to relate them to political developments. They take account of the stratification of the text and compare their conventional nature with archaeological and anthropological evidence. All this bodes well for the future of historical studies. Western writers no longer insist that all cultural elements came to India from outside. Some of them, however, hold that religious ideas, rituals, caste, kinship, and traditions are the central forces in Indian history. They also underscore various divisive features which made for stagnation and are more concrete, more concerned about the problem of stability and continuity. They seem to be fascinated by old exotic elements and want to preserve them forever. Such an approach implies that Indian society has not changed and cannot be changed, that stagnation is an integral part of the Indian character. Thus, the chauvinist and sophisticated colonialist use the study of India's past to prevent its progress. A few Indian writers magnify the role of religion and believe that everything good and great originated in their country. So, it is a very simplistic text written in this paragraph. So, I did not explain much about this because simply we can say the Indian scholars move towards the ancient historical past and positive viewpoint, uh, but they were painted by British historians as Indian people in ancient past that was they did not as civilized people, and also their social, economic, religious practices or art and architecture, they don't be able to create their much better fascinating world as do the British. Okay, so Indian scholars, Indian writers magnify the role of religion and believe everything good and great originated in their country because Indian people also consider themselves as the civilized, as well as they also generally talk about the social, political, economic, and technological viewpoint and discussed with each other to develop or to create them to and also the many fascinating points as writers discussed here. Okay, next is communal approach. Next you can write communal approach. Communal approach, or we can say it is called as the regional approach. Okay, communal approach, regional approach, regional identity. They generally the scholars of this uh, area is generally called as regionalist. Okay, communal approach. Since 1980, some Indian writers and their Western counterparts have adopted an aggressive and irrational approach to the study of ancient India. They identify it with Hinduism. Under British rule, colonialist historians deliberately denigrated India's achievements and attributed important elements of the Indian culture to external influence. Indian historians underlined India's contribution to world culture. Hence, in the interpretation of history, there was a continuing struggle between colonialism and nationalism. Colonialist scholars talk about British came in India due to British came in India and they took new social system or political system to liberate the ancient uncivilized past, which belief system was practiced by Indian people. Now the situation has undergone a change. The struggle now is between communalism and irrationalism on the one hand and rationalism and professionalism on the other. So first we would be able to know about what first is communalism and irrationalism, and second we know about professionalism and rationalism. Though most writers are rational and professional, some have become communal and irrational as well. The latter overplay myths and legends based on myths and legends upon the communal and irrational scholars. Arguing for the existence of Rama's Ayodhya without historical evidence, they censor all critical studies of the Brahmanical social structure and even support the caste system by ignoring the social inequity stressed by Manu. So, communal and irrational scholars generally talked about Rama came in Ayodhya or Rama born in Ayodhya, but it is not generally considered as the evidence found anywhere in the country or anywhere in Ayodhya surrounding, as talked about the communalist, okay, and irrationalist people. Those who once attributed a painted graveyard to the Vedic people and looked for its outside India now declare the Indo-Aryans to be indigenous Indians. They argue that the Muslims and Christians who came from outside are foreigners. They also consider themselves as Indian citizens. Such generalizations need to be dispassionately examined on the basis of rational reading of the sources. In the context of religion, neither Hindu nor Hindu Dharma is known to any ancient Sanskrit text, not to any other ancient source. So R.S. Sharma said that Hindu Dharma is not known any ancient Sanskrit text, any ancient text which are which were written by Indian scholars or Indian writers. nor any ancient source. The communal writers go on harping on Hindu and Hindutva. Under the circumstances, historians wedded to objective and scientific criteria have to be alert and adhere to reason and long established historical standards. So we should also consider themselves that we go to rational and the professional scholar instead of irrational and communal scholars. We should also know about our Indian past through the evidence, not any general evidence that was not recorded in ancient history. Or we can consider our archaeological survey of India's study about the ancient Indian history, that it generally uh, does not follow today's youth or any other scholars which are generally considered as communal scholars or irrationalist. Okay, so this chapter is ended, and we will talk about next chapter, that is known as nature of sources and historical construction. So we will meet in the next chapter, next lecture, to read more about the sources and historical construction. That is very important for mains point of view, and you have to write one to two questions each from these sources. Okay, because if you write the effective answer, and you can post your answer in the official telegram channel which I have given in a description. Okay, so have a good day. Thank you for watching.